Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Grace Centered Podcast. I'm Pastor Darren, pastor of Grace Gospel Fellowship and CEO of Grace Centers of Hope. If you want to learn more about our church, Grace Gospel Fellowship, feel free to go to gracegospelfellowship.org. Or if you want to learn more about Grace Centers of Hope, you can go to gracecentersofhope.org. Or, of course, you can always call 855-HELP-GCH to learn more and to get involved. But we have a great story for you today. This is Kyle. Say hi, Kyle.
Hello.
I think you're going to be blessed by Kyle's story. He's on staff over at Grace Centers of Hope. He can share more about that with you, but he has a story I think it will encourage a lot of people out there. Please feel free to share this on your feed. Shoot a text to other people with the link. I think it'll be a blessing to a lot of people, but all right, Kyle, why don't you go ahead and start wherever you want. Tell us how God has worked in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I think for my story, the best place to probably start is just, with childhood and the need to be accepted. That seemed to be something that I struggled with a lot growing up. There was always this want to be included, whether that was with friend groups at school or even in my own family. There was always a need of belonging, and that always seemed to be a void in my life. And so a big piece of that came from peer pressure, being accepted in school, wanting to kind of be, a part of a crew, and so
Crew.
a gang, but not an actual gang, but more of a group of people. And so I had the tendency to go and hang out with people that did what I thought at the time was fun and exciting things. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of snowballed into illegal activity, breaking into houses, vandalism. And of course, within all of that, drugs were introduced and underage drinking and all sorts of those things, partying. And so what was interesting when looking back, that acceptance really kind of married into substance abuse. And it was almost as if, if I was partaking in that I was accepted. And I didn't want to just be accepted. I wanted to be like ultra accepted. And so I did the most. I would do the most drugs. I would do the most drinking. I would do the most outrageous things. And it was always this, looking back retrospectively, it was always this need to be accepted, this void that was in me that said, you don't belong anywhere really. And ultimately, it certainly led to some really bad behavior and some destructive behavior, both physically, mentally, as well as to other people.
Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up, I'm from a little town called Carlton, downriver in Michigan. Yep. And then all
what do you mean by little town?
So Carlton was...
How many streetlights did you have?
None. And going around the block, it's just around the block, was like a mile. Yeah. And so I remember we lived on this dirt road, and our house is surrounded by cornfields. So there's not much to do. And then, of course, all my schooling and most of my friends were from Monroe, which was like one town over, not even 5 minutes away from Carlton. So I always kind of reference growing up in Monroe, but technically I'm from Carlton and a place that...
So you went to like Monroe High School or something?
I did, yep. I went to Monroe Public Schools.
Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, you're kind of from there.
Yeah.
How many, you got brothers and sisters and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I grew up as the youngest of three brothers, and we got along great. There was never any fighting. We loved each other. There was no conflict. No,
That's odd.
yeah. No, there was I mean, it was your typical growing up with brothers. We beat each other up, dislocated each other's, arms and shoulders, and just I remember I have very fond memories of
So where's
growing up.
Ryan at in that?
So Ryan is my oldest brother.
I know, because I was gonna say it because I can't imagine you dislocating his arm.
Beating no, he dislocated
Yeah,
mine.
all
Yeah.
right. Let's make that clear.
Yeah. And so I'm actually the smallest of the three. And so we're somebody said you guys have Viking blood because you're all so big. But I am literally the smallest one. And so yeah, I mean, even maybe from some of that was that need to fit in and be a part of something, and so yeah, growing up with my brothers was really fun, and there's so many memories that I have of us horsing around, and sure sometimes we got hurt, but it was always just a lot of fun.
So yeah, what was your family life like? I mean, it was fun with your brothers and stuff like that, but
Yeah. So, family life for the most part was pretty typical up to a point. My mom and dad both were Christians. They had us go to church with them. I distinctly remember our church services were about 3 hours long, roughly.
really,
It was called a Baptist church, but it wasn't Baptist in your traditional sense. There was a lot of singing and
what does that mean? It wasn't Baptist like in the,
so, it was interesting. I went to this Baptist church, so I always just assumed like Baptist church were like this massive gathering of people where you sang a song and then you heard a testimony and then you sang another song, and it like the pastor's rocking on his guitar and playing drums, and then he gets up and preaches a little bit of a message and then goes back to playing instruments, and people are flying flags and all sorts of things. It just very charismatic. And I realized after having been to a Baptist church later in life that like it was Baptist by name really. And it was a really great church family. I remember my dad having like church group in our basement, and so we had to be quiet because they would be studying the Bible, and it was just there were always this group of people at our house that were chasing after Jesus together and going through struggles together. So I was really raised in a very what I think a healthy Christian household. And then my father, there started to be a change in our family. And of course, my brothers and I got older and of course started experimenting with drugs and alcohol, all three of us. And then that need to fit in started to outside of my family, with friends and stuff like that. And there was a behavior change in my dad. At first, we thought it was depression. I remember one Christmas morning, he didn't come up to open gifts, which was very out of character for him. That was usually his favorite time of the year. And I remember as a kid thinking, like, that's weird. I was actually mad at him. I remember, like, how could you be so selfish? Like, this is Christmas and I want to get gifts and me. But also, it was odd. And then as time progressed, he started living in the basement. And I remember one particular day, my mom and him went to a doctor. And I think I was at school. And when I came home, I remember hearing him crying in another room. And I didn't really know like what to do. I was a kid.
how old are you?
I was probably 14, 15 years old, I want to say. And so I went in there and he was sitting on the edge of the bed. He was crying. And I sat next to him. And it was very awkward. And uh, and then I said, you know, everything's gonna be okay. I didn't really know what was going on. And then I remember he said, I don't want to forget you. And it kind of dawned on me in that moment, like, okay, like what's going on? Something serious is happening. And in that time, we found out that he had not dementia, like to be precise, it was more frontal lobe damage. He had raced cars a lot as a young man, and he had been in several accidents as a result of that. And so, as because of all those accidents and concussions, and of course shoulder replacement and hip replacements and all sorts of things like that, eventually it took a toll on his brain, and it pushed him into what we would experience as early onset dementia. And so the younger you are in that situation, the faster it progresses. He was probably 54, 53. And I was when probably about 14, 15. And so we started to see this behavior shift in him. And he liked to go for long walks. He liked to take our dog out for a walk. And again, like I mentioned, we grew up in a place where around the block is, of course, miles and miles and miles of nowhere. We're in the middle of nowhere. And so there was oftentimes at night when he wanted to go for a walk, and we had to stop him because of how dangerous it was. But there was a kind of a lack of understanding why in him. And so it really kind of excelled when one morning, probably 7 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell rang, and it was a police officer, and they had my dad with them. And he had gone into somebody's backyard and tried to go in their house, thinking it was his house. And so they were like, you got to do something. And so I remember pretty consistently coming home from high school, and it was myself, my grandmother, who was my mom's mom. We all lived at the house. My brothers had moved out at that point, and we would just kind of have to babysit. And my mom worked. She was the breadwinner at that point because he couldn't work anymore. And so it was my grandma and I kind of bouncing back and forth between each other, taking care of him.
What kind of work had he done?
So he was a master mechanic, and so he worked on cars a lot growing up. I remember a story where my mom said there's like a car that was like never going to start, and the guy said, you can have it if you can get it to start. And he got to start within 5 minutes. So he was really a genius in the auto mechanic world. And so unfortunately that didn't rub off on me, but he was really good at that. And then later in life, it was just kind of, he worked at like factories and things like that. And actually the last job he had was at a place in Dundee, and he worked with my brother, my middle brother. And so, but eventually they said, like, look, he can't do the job. And they all loved him, but the reality was he couldn't do the job anymore. And so they had to kind of lay him off. And so I remember that was another blow for him. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was tough. And so I really grew up watching that happen and watching him decline to the point where eventually my mom and grandma and I sat down and they said, we can't do this anymore. And we're going to have to take him to like a nursing home. Wow. And of course, with that comes insurance and comes how are you going to pay for it? And so that became a struggle. And but
what time frame was that?
So that was around, I was about 17 at the time.
So that had been
17,
going
18.
on like a few years?
Yeah, there was a couple years of just
that had to be
taking
so
care
hard.
of them.
I can't even imagine that.
Well, and what was interesting is I found my escape not through Christ, kind of in the way that he had led our family. I found it in wanting to belong in friendships and causing trouble and doing drugs and alcohol and chasing after the things of this world. And, that's one of the things that I regret is that was a I look back as, man, what an awesome opportunity to grow in your faith. And hard, sure, absolutely. And like you're gonna handle it the wrong way at times. That's the reality. But that could have been a really awesome time to grow in my faith. And unfortunately, that wasn't the route that I took. I took the complete opposite route.
Well, yeah, ultimately it led to that though, right? I mean,
It did.
I mean, those struggles. I did, when you're saying that, I sit back and I kind of think, man, you just have no idea what people are going through, So like every day you're going to school around your friends and stuff and just have no idea, they really, like we just don't have, so detached on what pain or hurt or fear, insecurity a person may really be going through.
Yeah.
Or even today, like what people have been through. You have this relationship with them, and I don't know, just as you're sharing that, like thinking of your dad, man, like sitting on the edge of the bed, just how challenging that would have been for him at that moment to be sort of diagnosed and being told that
Yeah.
I'm going to forget my kids.
Right.
I mean, I just, even the thought of that begins to just well up ideas of fear and then for you at like 14, 15 years old. Yeah. It's just like, yeah, I mean, you sit there and say like, man, you had this, could have been this great growing experience. I think it was probably more challenging, than we could possibly imagine to go through that. And what was your relationship like with God? Like, what did you think about God?
That's interesting. I really associated God with my dad, and so which is good, in a lot of ways. It definitely, but I also, I remember like going out and riding my bike. I loved riding my bike when I was a kid, and then eventually going out and riding my bike got me in a lot of trouble. But I just remember, like, on my way home, I would split off from my friends, and then I would be on because we all lived around the same area, and I would be riding home, and I would audibly talk to God. Like, I didn't hear, obviously, he's not like talking back audibly, but I would out loud talk to God and and just say like, I'm really struggling with this, or why did you do this? Or if I had a crush on a girl, why didn't she like me? Or, XYZ. I just remember having that kind of relationship where I knew he existed. I knew that I believed in him, but I also knew that like the life I was living wasn't pleasing to him. And so it was complicated, not to be, you know, like confusing about it, but it was. I mean, I growing up, I knew the goodness that could come from that relationship, but I really chose in that moment to lean on things that weren't him because there wasn't an instant gratification. I'm riding my bike, talking to God. He's not like immediately making me feel better. But there was a solace and a peace to, like, there's a reason I talked to him. Like, I don't think I would have kept doing that if I didn't get something from that. Unfortunately, it just didn't give me that instant gratification that, doing drugs or chasing after girls or, chasing after belonging in a group of friends and things like that, or vandalizing things, whatever that release was, it didn't, give me that instant gratification. And so that's probably why I didn't lean into it so much that I stopped doing all those other things.
Right. Yeah. So your dad, he ends up going into like this nursing home and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're sort of going down the wrong street. Where does that all lead?
Yeah, so because of insurance and all those things, he had to end up going to a place in Ohio. And Monroe is somewhat close to Ohio. It's in the southern area of Michigan. And so but it still was like an hour and a half. So I just remember like we didn't visit him a whole lot, like, or at least I didn't. I know my mom, I should say my mom was his caretaker to the very end. And what's interesting is my relationship with God really started to spin from watching how my mom took care of my father. And their marriage started to get kind of obviously rough in those spots before we knew what was going on. And then as soon as she figured out what was going on, like something clicked in her and she was this caretaker. And just even watching her take care of her own father, take care of her mother, take care of the three boys as much as she could. And then, watching her take care of him, it was just like watching this kind of superwoman just totally die to herself and just be a caretaker to all of these men and, people in her life. And so I shouldn't say we didn't visit. I should say I didn't visit a whole lot. I do remember the day we dropped him off. I do remember him like watching us out the window as we drove away. That was like I remember like at the last minute I said to my mom like maybe we shouldn't do this. I think this is wrong. And she was like we already made the decision and like this is this direction we have to go to keep him safe. And so that was probably traumatic, I imagine. And so once that happened, then it was like I all I don't know how to say it. Like
Yeah, off the rocker.
yeah, I went off the rocker. Like it was, and that's I had experimented with opiates before, maybe taking like Vicodin and things like that, but I had never done heroin or anything like morphine or anything crazy like that. And then I remember distinctly one of the first major drugs I started doing was morphine. And I was getting it from a guy who had some disabilities, physically. And he was then taking my money and going to get heroin. And so one day I was just like, where are you, what are you getting? What are you? And he was like, well, I'll show you, but like this stuff will ruin your life. And I'm like, okay. He's
Sounds
like,
good.
but it's not much different from morphine. And so, and then we started snorting it and I did that for a couple of years. And of course, in that process, my dad passed away. Eventually he had, I believe he got pneumonia. And I remember just being in the room with him as he passed. He was on a breathing machine. Most of us were there. We were singing Amazing Grace. That was one of his favorite songs. To this day, when I hear that song, it's like, I do wonder sometimes, like people hear that song, it's like, oh, it's like this old, church song. And it's, but when I hear that song, it's like sometimes I have to remove myself from that song because of the emotions that I feel from it, because it brings me right back to that moment. And watching him take his last breaths or hearing him take his last breaths. And so, yeah, after he passed away, it was really like, there was like the point of no return where it didn't really matter to me anymore. And I think that probably correlated around the time where I started dipping my toe into heroin, snorting it. And then
How old were you then?
I was 19 when he passed. And so probably between like 19 and 20 was when I started, graduated from morphine and went into snorting heroin.
So at that point, though, you had graduated high school and stuff.
Yeah,
Were you
so
working or?
yeah, I did. I barely graduated high school. I had to do like a alternative high school because I like got like that close enough to like walk across the stage, but then you get the diploma and it's empty. But it's okay because you'll go to summer school and you'll get the diploma. But then I didn't because I wanted to party still, and then I had to go to alternative high school, and so. Eventually I got my diploma. They sent it to me in the mail and I was like, oh, I didn't even know I got this thing. And then I worked at a car wash. Like that's during the summer. And then eventually I got a job at a video store place. And I loved movies already. So I was like, this is perfect for me. But my addiction just totally ran over everything. I mean, I was a full-blown addict walking into that job and doing heroin in between shifts, or taking a break to go do heroin in the bathroom, or, if anybody's, watching from those days, they'd probably be like, oh, that's what was wrong with
Yeah, it
him.
makes sense.
Yeah, that's why he's falling asleep during taking my order or whatever. And that's a video store. Those don't even exist anymore. So, but yeah, so I remember like having odd jobs like that, and eventually I got introduced to the needle, and started shooting up, and then that was like stealing and lying and breaking the law and going in the stores and stealing things and ripping people off and all sorts of things, like basically looking at this life that was given to me, of all these really great people who would help me at any point in time because of what I went through, and looking at it now in addiction as like a smorgasbord of people I can manipulate and take advantage of. And so it was really like in a warped way. It was like a treasure chest of like, this person's gonna give me money and this person's gonna give me money because they feel bad, and I know exactly what button to press, and it was just fueling my addiction. So I actually, probably for my safety, looking back, like that actually saved me from being in really, really bad situations because people were so sympathetic to what I was going on. But I used that, manipulated that, and turned that into an opportunity to just fuel this addiction. And ultimately it led to like me not wanting to be detoxing from the drug. And so the moment that drug leaves your system, you start feeling these flu-like symptoms. You start feeling, just sick and aggravated, and so you're really now at that point. You're not even. It's not like, I think a big misunderstanding is like that people continue to use drugs, specifically opiates. But you could say this for other drugs, that like they just want to keep getting high. Why don't you want to just stop getting high? And the reality is at one point, it's not about getting high, so to speak, anymore. It's about not getting dope sick and not getting those flu-like symptoms. I just want to feel normal, and my normal is having opiates in my system. And so that's really what you're chasing after. It's not the high. I mean, sure, we like the high, but that's becomes like not the most important thing. It's not getting sick.
So how long did that go on? Did you get caught up with like catch cases?
Yeah. So I was blessed up to a point. I would go back and forth to Detroit nonstop. I don't even know how many times.
Were you living at home still?
Yep, I was living in the basement of my mom's house. My dad had passed away at this point. My grandma still lived there. And so, but again, my mom's working nonstop because now she's a single, parent to like a 19-year-old man child who's doing heroin in the basement. And they knew that I was on drugs. I don't think they knew like it was heroin. I think that would have scared the crap out of them. But they knew I was on something that had completely taken over me. Mm-hmm. And so basically I would go to and from Detroit nonstop, almost every day. Suspended license, expired tags, and like it's a 30-minute drive on the expressway to there, and then 30 minutes back. Never got pulled over, never got anything like that in that situation. What ended up happening was I was actually on probation from like a year prior for being pulled over before I was a heroin addict with like weed in my car or something. And I got put on probation. And it was like, I just remember it was really long probation. And towards the end of it, I think it was the 6th month, I was at a party and there was a girl and I smoked weed with her. And if I had just finished that month, I would have been off probation and everything, but I didn't. And I think God had a plan in that moment, or he was able to use that for his ultimate plan. And so I didn't show up, I absconded. And so I had a warrant out for my arrest. And there was one day in particular where I had pretended to be my probation officer to my mom and my grandma.
Oh no.
And I had this thing going on for like 3 months of like pretending to be, I
What were
did
you
an
doing?
accent.
You were calling?
I would call them on, *6 7 or whatever it is where your
Yeah.
number's blocked. This is back when we had landlines. We don't have those anymore either. Or few of them. And so I would like disguise my voice in like a southern accent, and I would talk to my grandma. And I mean, and this is terrible. I mean, this is addiction 101, man. Like
Desperate.
Exactly. And so I'd be like, you got to write Kyle a check when you drop him off at probation today. He needs it, blah, 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 blah. And she'd be like, okay. And so this was going on for like 3 months. And then I remember one day I got, bold, and I called my grandma in that same moment. Again, I'm in the house like in a closet.
Oh my goodness.
And my mom, unbeknownst to me, who is, my grandma, she loved me dearly, and so like I don't think she ever thought that I could do something like this. And the warped mind of the addict was, I remember the first time I did it, I was so nervous, and then I pulled it off, and I was actually proud of myself.
Right.
Like that's the
I'm
level
good
of yeah.
this.
Like
Yeah.
no, look, I mean, look how like convincing. Well, one day my mom picked up the phone and listened, and she was like, "That's not the probation officer. I don't know who that is." She didn't know it was me. She's like, "I don't know who that is, but that's not a probation officer." And so they caught me. I got caught. And so I'm in the basement of my house, and they're like, "Yeah, my mom's like, you're not getting a check, dude. Like that ain't happening." And I threw a fit, started punching holes in walls and all sorts of stuff. And they called the cops because they were concerned. And so the cops showed up and of course dragged me out of the house. And I remember I was wearing a white tank top and some pajama pants. That the pajama pants still had blood on them from shooting up. And so I'm sitting in a cop car, and they ran my name. And as soon as they ran my name, it was like it had this like electronic beep that was like wanted or something. And I remember the cop turning around and saying, "You know what that means, right?" And I was like, "No." He was like, "That means you're coming with us." And so I went to jail. I ended up in court. And ultimately, the judge was. I told him, I'm like, "Listen, I'm a heroin addict. I totally, I don't know. I would, in the time, I'd said I wussed out and was like, I'm a heroin addict. I'm pleading, and I don't want to go to jail." And he's like, "We're gonna sentence you to 1 year in jail because it's a misdemeanor for absconding, and we're gonna try to get you some help." And so that was a long elevator ride back down to the jail.
So where'd that go? Did you go to treatment or something?
Yeah, so I was in jail. That was the longest I had been in jail for a little over 3 months, and then I got called out and interviewed by this place. It was a rehab. Had never been to rehab before. And they said, "We think you'd be a good candidate for 30 days. And so you'd be court ordered to do this. And then we'll talk about dismissing the rest of your sentence."
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that. And in that moment, I was like, okay, like I'm going to get sober. I'm going to figure this thing out. But in the back of my head, I was like, I think I'm still going to smoke weed. Like I still need like something to escape. There was no Christ in it.
So you went to the 30 days. You did that. You're kind of, but then you decided to start smoking weed again.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
So I got out, and I remember my brother saying like, "Man, you shouldn't be thinking like that. It's all or nothing." And so I tried, but eventually, probably within 6 months, I ended up going back to opiates.
And then the same cycle again.
Then I did it again. I went back into the rehab, and I think I did like 10 days, and then I bounced. I was like, I can't do this anymore.
So where does it all finally come to an end?
Yeah, so so my mom was like, "Hey, I think you need more long-term care." and I know this place. She had this card in her purse for a place called Grace Centers of Hope. It's in Pontiac. And all I remember of Pontiac was a monster truck rally I went to a long time ago in the Silverdome. And so she was like, basically, you need to get out or you're going to go to this place. And so I did. I came here and I spent about 9 months here and, thought I had it figured out. I ended up leaving. Or kind of being asked to leave. I wasn't following rules. I was getting into a lot of trouble towards the end there. It was girl stuff, of course, and so I ended up leaving. And about 6 months, I started using opiates again. And then I remember.
Did you go back home at that point?
I did.
Left
Yep.
here?
Yep.
Okay.
I went right back to where I came from. I lived in the basement. I was around the same people. I was sober, but nothing had changed really. I was just, I was like, okay, I should be good if I just go back to the same place. But now that I'm sober, I'll be all right. And I remember thinking in my head, it was all about sobriety. It was as long as I get sober, I'll be okay. And so again, about 6 months into that, I relapsed, and then it was probably about another year of just getting back into heroin and getting back into shooting. I think I even started experimenting a little bit with crack cocaine, and it was like just right back to where I started. But the primary difference was I remember when I got to a point where I was like, okay, something's wrong here and I need help. And I went to my mom and my grandma and I was like, you guys know that like something's off. And they're like, yeah, we kind of noticed like maybe you're dipping your toe in that stuff again. And I was like, no, I'm back in it. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to kill myself. And I think I need to go back to Grace Centers of Hope. And they were like, I remember specifically my grandma was like crying because she was like, I'll miss you. And after everything that I did to her, and she knew everything that I did to her, she still missed me. Mm-hmm. And again, these are all foundation pieces of the foundation being laid to understand the love that God had for me. And so I ended up saying, nope, I need to go back to Grace Center. There's something there that I didn't find anywhere else. And so when I came back, that really was that was like the beginning of the rest of my life. And I was about 22 years old.
Okay.
When I came back. So
a
lot happened in between all that stuff.
Yeah.
So when I first came here, I was 21, and then I was probably about 23 when I came back to Grace Centers of Hope.
So do you think that like at that point did you have a relationship with God, or you just kind of head full of religion or Christianity or something? Or?
I think that I didn't really have a relationship to what I consider to be a relationship today, but I remember being in jail and going to all these church services just to get out of jail, and there was one church service where it was like these big biker guys, totally intimidating looking, and they preached the gospel. And I remember they had a picture of Christ, or a illustration of Christ on the TV screen during worship. And I remember something coming over me, but of course then I got out and I was just like, whatever, but I remember feeling that feeling again at Grace Centers of Hope the first time. When I was sitting in a church service. It was a Wednesday night. It was when we had church, not here at Clutch Cargoes, but at where the Women's Center is now. And I felt this movement in my heart and in my body. I actually felt something physical, like a lightness. And of course, I'm like, it was, I don't know. It's probably the way my leg was crossed or something. I was just trying to run from it. I was always running from it. And but whatever that thing was, it led me back to ultimately having a relationship with Jesus now. But at the time, and even coming back into Grace Centers of Hope, I didn't really understand what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus, or what it meant to say, like, you have to find your identity in Christ. Like, what does that mean? And I think that was like the major stumbling block for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And so obviously now you've been here for 15 years or something.
Yeah.
And
Just about.
and so yeah, a lot has happened in that period. Eventually, what did you? So you went through the whole year again or something in the life skills program, and then eventually started working in like security or something, didn't you? At that point? Or I
Yeah.
can't remember like what.
Yeah. Well, so there was a program called the Mentor Program,
Oh
and
yeah.
so essentially, what Grace Centers of Hope offered at that time was they'll pay for part-time going to school at Oakland Community College, and then the other part of the time you had to fulfill like a job duty here at Grace Centers of Hope to pay for your room and board and all that stuff, because they're also paying for college. And so I dabbled between being in security and then also being a resident assistant.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I remember I most of the people went to school for like social work and things like of that nature, because most people want to be a case manager or things like that. And I remember I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get into filmmaking and I wanted to make movies. And I remember a conversation with you actually where you said, well, like how do you see that fitting into like the overarching vision of Grace Centers of Hope? And we were standing in the kitchen, because I worked in the kitchen at the time, and I said, I think we could make videos and things like that. You and I talked back and forth, and then eventually you're like, all right, I'll bite on, we'll pay for you to go to school for that. And then really like just being given an opportunity to like help Grace Centers of Hope start a video production. I think at the time we were outsourcing videos, which is very costly. And so if we could train somebody that had the passion and the want to do that, then it certainly could benefit Grace in the sense of not having to spend a bunch of money on videos, but creating more content and creating more targeted content in the sense of getting the gospel and reaching people with the gospel, both inside Grace Gospel Fellowship and within Grace Centers of Hope as the organization. And so, and then in that process, that's where I met people like a Joe Curtis, who was kind of already doing editing with videos. And so, there was a friendship there that formed, and just learning how to do it from the ground, going to school and then doing it for real, but also still having to fulfill my job of working in security as an RA as well. And so,
So yeah, eventually you got like what your degree in filmmaking,
yeah,
whatever.
I ended up getting associate's degree in cinematic arts, and then was able to make a lot of really cool videos here at Grace Centers of Hope. And then it kind of spiraled into making like movies that were winning in like festivals and stuff like that. And I remember going to Sundance Film Festival, which is in Utah, as a result of winning a contest for this eulogy movie. And in that process, that eulogy movie was based off my wife's story, who I didn't know at the time was going to be my wife, but we were dating, and she was like, I knew that she had a really cool story, and I had to like convince her to like tell this story. And then it ended up being the very story that like took us to Sundance, and
How cool.
and it was just cool. And it was all gospel. Like I was talking about Jesus, and we're in this contest with all these other videos that weren't. And so I really like there was probably some pride there. And I remember my mom and my grandma, they were able to see some of those things, and just like see this total transformation of who I was, to who I ultimately became, and in Christ.
Yeah. So how do you like what was it that was so transforming to you? What was it that you really felt
You
worked
know,
in your life?
you mean like at Grace Centers or
Just
just in general what was
yeah.
happening? I think that first and foremost, it was understanding who I was in Jesus. It was understanding that my earthly father had passed, but I had a father in heaven, and really understanding like what his love looked like to me. And so really like Ephesians, and things like that that really like led me to understand that like he considered me like a masterpiece, and he like actually felt like he uses us and our uniqueness to bring him glory. And so like understanding that, like, yes, I was different. A lot of my brothers were like sports leaning, and I was always leaning more towards the creative arts end of things, and maybe I felt like I didn't fit in there, but the reality is like, no, God created you exactly the way you are to bring him glory, which is like the ultimate creator uses me to bring him glory. And so there's definitely like that perspective change. I think too, like a big piece of Grace Centers of Hope was like I grew up. I really had like one singular good influence who followed Christ, who eventually got sick and passed away, which was my father. And I didn't really have anybody else of that nature around me. Come to Grace Centers of Hope and into this community, and you have that around you. I mean, we're all crazy in our own ways, and we're certainly not perfect. And I have yet to see anybody that's exactly like Jesus.
That won't happen.
Yeah, and if I do, then something's off. But I did find several men who would just guide me towards Christ and guide me towards Scripture and guide me towards what it means to worship and what it means to live a life like Christ and sit under preaching that was the gospel through and through, and sitting under Pastor Clark for so many years and hearing his preaching, sitting under your preaching and hearing that, and several other preachers and pastors who would preach the gospel, and really getting like a crash course over a decade of like what the gospel is and what it means to me. And I'm still figuring that out. I haven't figured it all out, and probably never will, but I'm getting closer to understanding who I am in Jesus every day. And so like that was the big piece, is like there's no end to this story. The end is an eternity with him, and that's
Yeah.
eternity. So it just goes on and on. And so yeah, it was the big change for me was just having those positive male role models in my life that were still strong and were still tough, but they followed Christ. And I think there's that perspective as a kid that like maybe somebody's not so tough if they, because Jesus, they always paint this picture of Jesus of being like kind of this dainty,
Mm-hmm.
peace hippie type guy. And so you just assume that people who follow Christ are as a kid that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is like when I came here, like, no, there's people who follow Christ who like were in prison for like 20 years in gangs and are like these big biker guys, or there are guys who have like way crazier stories than I ever had. And these strong women who have had to rear their families in a lot of ways, whether it was because the husband got sick or still love somebody even though they literally stole from you. And so I really began to, Grace like led me towards those men that could teach me that, but also allowed me to look back at my life from a retrospective sense and see the Christ in my grandma, and see the Christ in my mom, and see the Christ in my father, and even at times my brothers, and
And how good he had been to you, and
so good,
protecting you and guiding you and
so good,
hedging you about.
yeah,
Even when you were a betrayer, denier.
absolutely,
Yeah, that's then the grace of God. Just the the greater the sinner we really know we are, I think the more we're revealed on the greatness of His grace, you know. And so today, like how is God working in your life today? I mean, what would you know? Obviously, none of us are glorified, and you know that's you know probably a lot like a movie.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know that like it was some movie you watched, not necessarily a life you lived.
Yeah.
But today, you're right. You know, you and Ginger are married. You have
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
You have a whole host of new challenges, I'd imagine.
Yes. Yes. And we share in some of those challenges
Yeah.
too. You know, I think that I mean today God is awesome. I'm married to just like you know that you know
Get it
I
right,
yeah.
bro.
Well, no, I just it makes me emotional. You know, when I think about my wife Ginger and you know like that's God just has blessed me, you know, so much with her. It's indescribable. And then, of course, we have our two children, our two daughters, who are just. I couldn't ask for better kids, honestly. Not every day's like a cakewalk, but they are just two little beautiful girls, and I thought growing up like, oh, I'm gonna have three boys just like I grew up in, and God was like, nah, dog, like you're gonna have two girls and you're gonna learn to be a girl dad, and I love it, and I have a job where really I have an opportunity to lead a team. So now I serve as the director of development for Grace Centers of Hope, and so what that means is really being the head of the team that fundraises and comes up with ideas from a marketing standpoint. Really works with donors themselves and continues to create content and special events and grants and all sorts of things that really are required for a place that's non-government funded like Grace Centers of Hope to sustain itself, working through people that are willing to give to Grace. And so a lot of that is working alongside of you. And when it comes to speaking engagements and things like that, or the radio, or all sorts of opportunities, and really looking at how we can grow that into the future. And so, I mean, it's an incredible blessing, and to be able to come to work every day and do that from a leadership position, but also an incredible blessing from a creative end of things, because no 2 days are the same, and there's never two problems that are similar that need to be solved. It's always something different, and so it's I heard a quote the other day that said the places that are the businesses that are the best to work at are usually the hardest, and infrastructurally, and I was like, that reminds me of the challenges, right,
Yeah.
of working for a nonprofit and the long hours and just it's just every day. It's you clock
What
in, you got to
to
do
what
it.
degree do you feel like, you know, because you started off by talking about that, you know, that desire to belong and be
Mhm.
part of something.
Mhm.
You know, how has the gospel in just, you know, the church or ministry sort of can you identify that and be like, yeah, man, that longing that I always
Yes.
had, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, that was the thing that I was looking for my whole life. That was the thing I was looking for in drugs and alcohol and just like wanting to fit in. And on in like a relational sense, being here, being in our church and being in our organization, it is like a family, and it is a thing where all of us came from different corners of the earth and came into this situation together, and we're all fighting for the same thing, and we have different mindsets towards how to do that sometimes, but we all fight for the same thing, which is ultimately to bring people to know Jesus. And so, but first bringing them through things like addiction and homelessness and stuff like that. So I have never in my life have I felt as unified with a group of people than I have being here at Grace Centers and being in our Church Grace Gospel Fellowship, really for the primary purpose that like we know what we're here to do.
Mm.
And so that's the easy part. And so, yeah, that sense of belonging. And then on a spiritual level, understanding that my relationship with Jesus is not one sided. It's not just about, him intervening in my life and like, uh, whether that's like curing me like of if I ever were to get cancer or curing me of an addiction or really giving me such a beautiful gift as a family and a fantastic job to work with all these people. It's not just like what he can give you. It's also on your side. How are you leaning into him? How are you understanding like who you are to him? And putting in the work too. And I think for the longest time I was just kind of waiting for him to do something. And the reality is like he will, but like there is that aspect of you also have to lean into his word. You can either enter in and have a faith moment or you cannot. He's still going to do what he's going to do. But man, if you're in that relationship with him when all those things are happening, that faith, your faith will build so much, and it's just that it's a back and forth relationship. It's not one sided, and of course in that you feel like you belong. He makes you feel comfortable. He makes you feel, and you can hear you can see your name in scripture when you're reading through his word. Maybe not physically see it, but you can identify yourself and where he has loved people that have come before you that were exactly in the same position you're in now. And maybe just have to adjust for the context of the time, but man, human beings, the human experience, it's no different now than it was then.
Yeah.
And so I do now I have a sense of belonging.
So, what would you say to somebody who's out there? I mean, I would imagine you wouldn't have ever dreamed, really, or certainly not imagined you being in the situation you are now. As
No.
a father, husband.
Yeah.
Got a good job, enjoying what you're doing, part of something bigger than yourself, greater purpose. Being part of changing people's lives. So, what would you say to the guy who's in the basement right now?
I think I would say that you don't belong where you're at right now. You maybe think that's all that life has to offer you, and that maybe the world would be a better place without you. But I can assure you it is not. I can assure you that you do belong somewhere and you belong to someone, and you might be different and you might be not where you're at or where you think you should be at in life, but God has a plan for you. And maybe that doesn't necessarily make somebody who doesn't have a relationship with God yet like feel comfort, and that's okay. Then I would say, in even in that moment, in a secular sense, you belong somewhere, and there's a community. Whether that's here at Grace Centers of Hope or somewhere else, there is a community of people that will love you and accept you for who you are, and will they don't look at you like a mistake, and so don't look at yourself that way. And then in a spiritual sense, because I can't help but go back to that, like God loves you, and he has a purpose for you, and I can tell you what that purpose is. It's to bring other people to know him. And so yeah, I would say like don't give up. Like keep trying to get sober, keep trying to figure it out, keep trying to find a place that's going to work for you. And I mean, it's not going to hurt to open up the Bible and read some scripture. It definitely can change your life, and it will. And there's an opportunity out there where your whole life is before you got involved and after. And
Yeah, and it's the way that works really is it's going to require surrender
mm-hmm.
and faith. You
Yeah.
know, that there's not going to be anything promised in the like it's going to be legit surrender.
Yeah.
Like I'm giving up. And the reason why I'm confident in saying that is because that's the daily walk of any Christian is to on a daily basis surrender and put it into the hands of the Lord rather than trying to control and manipulate outcomes and
Mm-hmm.
relationships to try to like I'll do this if, you know,
Yep.
and it's going to require surrender and faith. And but man, you know, there's when that happens, it's very freeing.
Amen.
And that's the best place to be. It may not be the outcome that you were hoping for. Usually the outcome is a lot better. I like to say God's plans are always, they're just repeatedly, you know, better than what my plans were. And so I would encourage people to just surrender and trust, you know, and do it with us.
Yeah.
Come on for the
absolutely.
ride. Come die for Jesus. And,
Yeah.
yeah, well, thank you so much, man, for sharing your
course.
story. I know it's going to be encouraging to a lot of people. If you're out there today and you may know somebody who's stuck in the basement or just stuck in themselves, maybe it's you, I'd encourage you, come on out to Grace Gospel Fellowship, come on out to Grace Centers of Hope, or, you know, if you're not anywhere in this area, maybe God's calling you to do something, you know, locally in your church, get involved in a grace-centered church. You know, that's really the foundation of everything that we do here. That's really the answer. It's God's grace. That's what causes us to belong. That's what really heals us from the inside out, and all of us. And it's a daily process. Nobody's got it all together. We're a bunch of beggars telling other beggars where to get bread, and Jesus is the bread of life. So thank you so much for watching and listening today. If you want to learn more about Grace Gospel Fellowship, go to gracegospelfellowship.org. If you want to learn more about Grace Centers of Hope, go to gracecentersofhope.org. Or I'm sure if Kyle, if he'd be more than willing, I'm sure, to chat with you, help you out.
Absolutely.
If you can identify, maybe you're called to make movies and videos. Kyle, I'd love to talk to you. So thanks.